How are you guys doing? Today is Saturday, March 26th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile for Von Miller. The elite defensive end for the Buffalo Bills is now turning 33 today, and what I'm going to do with this episode is, of course, take a look at what Von Miller has been able to do as one of the world's premier elite football players from the moment that he stepped onto the field, stepped into the limelight in college, to where he is now as he's just coming off of a season where he won his second Super Bowl for the second team that he's played for. As Von Miller has had a very storied career, I believe he's well on his way to a Hall of Fame career if he hasn't already accomplished that already. I'm going to look at what he's done and examine what he's done on a micro level, look at what he's done game in, game out, season in, season out, to continually prove that he is one of the best players and is an elite defensive player at his position ever since he stepped in the league. And of course, I'm going to zoom out and look at what he's done and how he's been able to affect the league on a macro level, because I do think that the way he's played the game has definitely changed the way the game is played. Standing at 6'3", standing at 250 pounds, he's a very fast, very versatile, very smart defensive end. He usually, at the very beginning, and even now, he still really kind of gets the edge by having an amazing first step, edge on his defender, and just because he's just so smart and he's played so many snaps at the line, he's just getting smarter and smarter as he's playing the game. Even after he's really kind of losing a step, he's still a very savvy and a very intelligent defensive end. So I digress. Getting into a story, I guess to start off, he played high school football in Texas, and if you're aware of how intense high school football in Texas is, he went on to play football in DeSoto, which is probably one of the premier, in the top tier, top echelons of Texas high schools. At DeSoto, he would establish himself as being one of the top high school prospects in the state of Texas, which is, of course, a very tough thing to do. He would then end up choosing to play college football at Texas A&M, and he would go on to play at Texas A&M for 4 years. As the year that he would go on to play there, he was recruited by Dennis Franchione, but Franchione would end up not being the coach for the majority of Von Miller's career there. And looking at how Von Miller's career would start, looking at his age 18 season, his freshman season with the Texas A&M team. In his freshman season in 2007, he would go on to play 9 games as he would work his way onto the starting lineup. But he would go on to skip class, and he actually failed to produce during practice as a freshman. He almost ended up transferring, but he ended up really kind of getting his act together. But in the 9 games that he ended up playing for Texas A&M in a season where they would end up going 7-6 as a team, Von Miller would go on to finish with 22 tackles on the season. He even had 4 tackles for loss and a couple of sacks. He would go on to force his first collegiate fumble that season as well. That season, Texas A&M would go to the Alamo Bowl, where they would lose by a touchdown to Penn State. But of course, Von Miller would see himself work his way up into being one of the primary players that Texas A&M would use. As a sophomore, he would start as a weak side linebacker in the 4-3 defense for Texas A&M, and in his second season under Mike Sherman, in Mike Sherman's first full season as a coach, he will go on to start all 12 of the games he played in a season where Texas A&M would finish with a 4-8 record, winning 3 less games than his freshman season. In that season, Von Miller would see himself finishing with 44 tackles, doubling what he did as a freshman. He would finish with 7.5 tackles for loss, almost doubling what he did his freshman year. He also would finish with 2 forced fumbles, and he also finished with 3.5 sacks, virtually doubling what he did as a freshman, as he became a very reliable player. As he would go on to move to a defensive end position as a junior, he would settle into the position that everyone would really kind of know and be comfortable with seeing him in. In his junior season at Texas A&M, which was his age 20 season, he will go on to start 13 games in a season where the Texas A&M Aggies, will go on to finish with a 6-7 record. They won 2 more games in the prior season as they qualified for the Independence Bowl. They went to the Independence Bowl just to get schmacked by 24 points by Georgia that season. But in his third season, Von Miller would go on to be named to the first team All Big 12, and he was a first team All American in one of Texas A&M's last seasons in the Big 12. In his junior season, while becoming a first team All Big 12 first team All American player, in the 13 games he played, he finished with 47 tackles, which was as many as he had his sophomore season, but this time he was on the line. He would see his tackles for loss jump up from 7.5 to 21.5. His 21.5 tackles for loss are the most tackles for loss he's had in a season in his collegiate career. He would also finish with 17 sacks. That would be the most sacks that he would ever record in a season at Texas Tech. He would go on to be the first Aggie to be a first-team All-American since Jason Webster in 1999. He would, of course, like I said, put together an amazing season, put together career highs in college, at least at that point. He would also go on to force 4 fumbles that year, as he did not force a single fumble his senior year. After that year, he would establish himself as one of the better prospects, but he did come back in return for his senior season at Texas A&M, as he would go on to switch to playing as a 3-4 outside linebacker, not playing the same position twice, really, in college. He would go on to suffer a high ankle sprain for the first 6 games. That would hold him back, but he would still go on to play every single game his senior year. In his age 21 season for Texas A&M, he would start all 13 games in a season where Texas A&M finished with a 9-4 record. They finished as a ranked team, as they finished ranked number 19 in the AP poll. They would go on to lose in the Cotton Bowl to LSU by 17. But in that season, Von Miller would go on to be named to the first team All Big 12, first team All American for the second year in a row for both. He was given the Butkus Award, given to the best linebacker in the country. In his senior season with Texas A&M, he would finish with 68 tackles, which was 21 more than the previous season, and the most tackles he would ever put together in a season. He would finish with 17.5 tackles for a loss, 4 less than his junior year. And he would finish with 10.5 sacks, 6.5 sacks less than what he did his junior year. He would also go on to finish with his lone interception of his college career. And in 2010, after being named the top and following that season, which he was named the top linebacker for the 2010 year, he would be taken with the 2nd overall pick in the 2011 NFL draft, right behind eventual MVP of the NFL, Cam Newton. He was taken in the top 10 of that draft, including picks like AJ Green, who went from Georgia to the Bengals. The next pick was Marcel Darius. He went from Alabama to the Buffalo Bills with the 3rd pick. Patrick Peterson went from LSU to the Cardinals with the 5th pick. Julio Jones went from Alabama to Atlanta with the 6th pick. Looking at other picks, J.J. Watt, multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year, went from Wisconsin to the Houston Texans with the 11th pick of this draft. Cameron Jordan, the elite starting defensive end for the Saints, was taken with the 24th overall pick out of Cal. And then, of course, Cameron Hayward was the last elite pick in this round, as the Steelers drafted him out of Ohio State. Just to get a sense of the talent that he was drafted around, Von Miller was the 2nd overall pick out of that draft. And after that season, after being drafted by the Denver Broncos, he would go on to play the very first 9 years of his career for the Denver Broncos. Looking at his very first season in 2011, in his age 22 season, he will go on to start all 15 of the games he played in a season where the Broncos would finish with an 8-8 record. After missing the playoffs the previous 5 years, they would make the playoffs in John Fox's first year. In his first season, Von Miller would go on to be named the Defensive Rookie of the Year in the NFL. In the 15 games he played, he finished with 64 tackles on the year, as he had 19 tackles for loss. He would finish with 4 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, as he had 11.5 sacks. He had a double-digit amount of sacks in his rookie season. In addition to being named the Defensive Rookie of the Year, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler in 2011 in his very first season, and he would go on to be named to the 2nd team All-Pro in his very first season in the league, establishing himself as one of the top 5 players in his position, a very tough position to establish yourself as one of the best in. And then following that season, the Denver Broncos would go to the playoffs where they would end up beating the Steelers in overtime. This is the year where Tim Tebow threw the touchdown to Demaryius Thomas that will go down in history. And then they will go on to lose in the divisional round to the Patriots. And then looking at how that season would end up, the Patriots would go to the Super Bowl where they would end up losing to the New York Giants. But following that season, this would transition into Von Miller's second season with the Broncos. In his age 23 season in 2012, he would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Broncos would finish with a 13-3 record. They would win 5 more games in the previous season as they would win the AFC West for the second year in a row. This is the year where Peyton Manning would come back from his injury and be named the comeback player of the year after the Colts had drafted Andrew Luck the prior year during Peyton Manning's injury. In Von Miller's second season, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler. He would be voted second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. He was runner-up in that award to J.J. Watt. As J.J. Watt almost won it unanimously, Von Miller only got 1 vote. He would be a Pro Bowler and a AP first-team All-NFL player. In the 16 games he played, he would finish with 68 tackles, which is 4 more than he did his rookie season. He would finish with 28 tackles for loss, which would be his career high by far. The only time in his career he's had at least 20, and he had 8 more than 20. He would go on to finish with 6 forced fumbles, the most forced fumbles he finished with in his career. He would record a pick 6, the very first pick 6 of his career and the very first interception of his career. He would also finish with 18.5 sacks. His total of 18.5 sacks in his second year in the league is the highest that he's ever recorded in a season in his NFL career. He has not recorded higher than 18.5, and that would, of course, lead to him being the Defensive Player of the Year runner-up and a Pro Bowler in his second year, and he would be named to the AP First Team All-Pro for the very first time in his career. Once the Broncos made the playoffs, they would end up losing in overtime to the Baltimore Ravens in the divisional round. And then, of course, that season would end up with the Ravens beating the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 47 in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. That would be Von Miller's second season in the league. His third season in the league would be his age 24 season in 2013. 2013 would be a season in which he was kind of plagued a little bit by injury, or he was actually suspended after he tried to cheat a drug test. However, he will go on to start all 9 of the games he played in a season where the Broncos would finish with a 13-3 record. They would finish with the same record they had the prior year, as this would be the 3rd year in a row that the Broncos would win the AFC West. This is the year where Peyton Manning would break the single-season touchdown record, and I don't know if he broke the yards record, but I know he broke the touchdown record for sure. He would be named the Offensive Player of the Year, and he would win the last MVP of his NFL career. This would be John Fox's 3rd season in Denver. In this 13-3 season, in the 9 games that he played, Von Miller would finish with 34 tackles in the half season that he played, which is pretty much on par with what he did the year before. He finished with 9 tackles for loss, as he had 5 sacks in those 9 games. He would finish with 3 forced fumbles. He would finish with his first recovered fumble. It would be his 3rd season where he's had at least 3 forced fumbles, which is a very tough feat to do. He would go on to pick up his very first fumble recovery touchdown, his 2nd defensive touchdown of his career. The only fumble recovery touchdown of his career actually will be picked up in 2013. And after playing half the season, he would help the Denver Broncos in the playoffs, as they would go on to beat the Chargers 24-17 in the divisional round. Once they made it to the AFC Championship, they would end up beating the New England Patriots in 10. And then once they made it all the way to the Super Bowl, they would end up losing 43-8. They got embarrassed by the Seattle Seahawks, as that would be Seattle's title that they would win with Pete Carroll, as they won this one. This would be Super Bowl 48 that they won in MetLife Stadium. The first of 2 straight appearances that the Seahawks would make. And that is the most recent championship that the Seahawks have actually won to date. But following that, that would be Von Miller's third season in the league. This would lead to Von Miller's fourth season in the NFL. His age 25 season in 2014 would see him start all 16 of the games he played, after, of course, missing half the season the prior year due to violating NFL policy. But in his fourth season, and he would start all 16 games in a season where the Broncos finished with a 12-4 record. They would win the AFC for the fourth year in a row after winning with one less game. This would be John Fox's last season in Denver. In that season, Von Miller would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the third season in his first 4 years in the league, his third full season in the league. He will be named to the second team All-Pro as he finished with 60 tackles in the 16 games he played. He had 16 tackles for loss, literally averaging one tackle for loss per game. He would go on to finish with a forced fumble and even a fumble recovery on the year. He would finish with 14 sacks, making it the third full season in his first 3 full years in the league that he had a double-digit amount of sacks. Even in his total of 14 would be his highest for a bit, at least at that time. So that would be a very big season for him. After putting together a solid Pro Bowl season, yet again, the Broncos would go right to the playoffs, and they would lose in the divisional round to the Colts as Peyton Manning lost to his successor in Indianapolis, Andrew Luck. That would conclude the John Fox era in Denver, and this would transition into Von Miller's fifth season with the team. In his age 26 season in 2015, Von Miller would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Broncos would finish their regular season with a 12-4 record. They would win the AFC West for the fifth time, and actually 2015 is the last time that the Denver Broncos have made the playoffs as a franchise. This was Gary Kubiak's very first season. And looking at how that 2016 season would finish, looking at how that 2015 season would finish, this in the second straight season where he played all 16 games, he would go on to finish with 35 combined tackles, which is about half of what he had the prior season as he took more of an outside linebacker role. He would still go on to finish with double-digit sacks as he had 11 on the season, making it the fourth season in his first 5 years in the league that he was able to do so. He also finished with 4 forced fumbles, making it the fourth season in his first 5 years that he was able to record at least 3 of them. And then once the 2015 season would come to an end, he would go on to help the Denver Broncos make it into the playoffs. Not to mention that in this season, he became the third fastest player to reach 50 career sacks as he did it in 58 games. In the divisional round, he would have a couple of sacks in a game where the Broncos would end up beating the Steelers by a touchdown. In the AFC Championship, the Broncos would end up beating the Patriots by 2 as he would go on to sack Tom Brady 2.5 times. He broke a Broncos single-game playoff record. He also had an interception in that game. And then he would go on to face the MVP Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers in the Super Bowl. And he would go on to knock the ball out of Cam Newton's hands while sacking him, while forcing a fumble, while that fumble recovery would eventually lead to a touchdown. He would also force a second fumble in the game as he had 2.5 sacks and 6 tackles for the entire game. In Super Bowl 50, Von Miller would be named the Super Bowl MVP. And of course, by that time, Von Miller was, by 2015, by the time that he was a Super Bowl MVP, he was, this was the season that he was named to the AP first team All-NFL for the second time in his career. He's been a 4-time All-Pro player by his 5th year in the league, a 4-time Pro Bowler. And the 1 year that he missed was because he was suspended for half the year. That was his first half decade in the league. And that was the last time that the Denver Broncos have made it to the playoffs. And that was the last Super Bowl that Peyton Manning would, of course, win in the NFL. This would transition into Von Miller's 6th season with the Denver Broncos and Gary Kubiak's 2nd season. In 2016, in Von Miller's age 27 season, he would start all 16 games for a 3rd year in a row, in the 4th year in a 5-year stretch. In a season where the Denver Broncos would go on to finish with a 9-7 record. They won 3 less games than the prior season as they would finish with the 3rd best record in the AFC West. They would completely miss the playoffs, but within the season itself, Von Miller would be named a Pro Bowler for the 5th straight full season that he's played in the NFL. He would go on to finish as the runner-up as the Defensive Player of the Year for the second year in a row, as he lost out to Khalil Mack on the Raiders. He had one less vote than Khalil Mack, as Khalil Mack would finish with a pick. I mean, they would pretty much finish with roughly identical stats on roughly identical teams for that season. But of course, Von Miller this would be the second time that he was at least one of the top 2 players considered. He will be named to the first team All-NFL for the 3rd time in his career in 2016. That is the most recent time that he's been named to the first team All-Pro. He hasn't been named since 2016. And also he would be named a Pro Bowler for the 5th time in his career, and of course the 5th year that he was eligible to do so. And at the conclusion of this 2016 season, they would go on to miss the playoffs. But of course, Von Miller was still doing what Von Miller needed to do within his own, with the Denver Broncos. Following this season, in 2016, not to mention that he would go on to sign a 16-year deal to become the highest paid defensive player in NFL history. That was prior to this season. So this would transition into Von Miller's 7th season with the team in his age 28 season in 2017. He would start all 16 games for the 4th year in a row. In this season, the Denver Broncos would finish with a 5-11 record. They had won 4 less games in the prior season in Vance Joseph's first season as the coach. They would finish with the worst record in the AFC West division, and Von Miller would go on to finish with, he would go on to finish with a combined 57 tackles in that season, as he had 10 sacks on the year. This would be the 4th year in a row, and this would be 6 straight full seasons in which he's had double-digit sacks in the year. His 10 sacks that year would be the career low in his 7-year stretch to start his career. He would go on to finish with a couple of forced fumbles in this year, as well as even a fumble recovery. In this year, he will be named a Pro Bowler for the 4th year in a row for the 6th time in his first 7 years in the league. He would also be named to the second team All-Pro in 2017, as in 2017, he was named to the second team for the 3rd time in his career, making it the 6th season in his first 7 that he was named to either the first or second team All-Pro. So proving that he is consistently one of the best players at his position for over half a decade. Even though the Broncos would fail to make the playoffs, Von Miller would, of course, return for his 8th season with the team. In his age 29 season in 2018, he would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Denver Broncos would finish with a 6-10 record in Vance Joseph's second season. They won one more game prior to the second season, as this would be the 3rd season in a row that they failed to make the playoffs. In 2018, Von Miller would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the 7th time in his first 8 years, the only exception being his suspension year. He would go on to make the AP second team All-Pro for the 4th time in his career. That's the last time that he's actually made an All-Pro team, as he would also go on to make the Pro Bowl for the 7th time in his career. Looking at how he fared within that season itself, in the 16 games he played, he had 48 tackles on the year, which was 9 less than the previous year. He finished with 14.5 sacks. That would be the 5th year in a row, and it would be the 7th year in this first 8 that he would have a double-digit amount of sacks recorded in the NFL. He had 14 tackles for loss. He would also go on to finish with an interception, the 2nd interception of his career. He would finish with 4 forced fumbles. That is the last time that he's forced multiple fumbles in a season as well. At 2018 is the last season he finished with a double-digit amount of sacks, and the last time he made an AP team, even though the Broncos would fail to make the playoffs. But this would transition into Von Miller's 9th consecutive season with the Denver Broncos. In his age 30 season in 2019, he would start all 15 of the games he played in a season where the Denver Broncos would finish with a 7-9 record. They won one more game than their prior season in Vic Fangio's first season coaching the team. Von Miller would go on to finish with 46 tackles in those 15 games, as he had 10, or he would go on to finish with 10 tackles for loss. He finished with 8 sacks. That would be his very first full season in the NFL that he would finish with a single-digit amount of sacks. His first season removed from being an All-Pro player. Regardless, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the 8th time in his 9th year being a pro. Following this year, he would go on to make the 2010s All-Decade team, even though the Broncos would fail to make the playoffs. And then in 2020, he would end up suffering a freak injury near his ankle that would end his season right before the season started. He would miss a 2020 season with the Broncos that saw them go 5-11. They would win 2 less games in the prior season. But of course, this would transition into Von Miller's 10th season in the NFL, the season that he started with the Broncos and eventually ended up on the Rams. In his age 32 season, he would start 7 games before he eventually would get traded to the Los Angeles Rams, as the Rams would end up picking him up right before the playoffs, as they eventually needed him to they eventually wanted him to make a run at the playoffs, essentially. There are talks about him having talks with Odell Beckham Jr. as they both decided that they would go on to play there together. But he would go on to get traded for a 2nd and 3rd round draft pick, and once he got picked up by the Rams, he would be an instant impact player. Looking at how he fared on the Broncos before, in the 7 games he played in Denver, he would record 4.5 sacks. He even had 19 tackles in that span. In the 8 games he played for the Rams, he would go on to finish with 5 sacks, as he had 31 tackles in those games. 12 more tackles than he did with Denver. On the entire season, he finished with 50 tackles on the year. He even had 9.5 sacks, half a sack away from double digits. But still 9.5 sacks in a full season where he would go on to switch teams. He would also go on to a Los Angeles Rams team that will go on to win the NFC West with a 12-5 record. This would be the 4th time in the last 5 years that the Rams would make the playoffs in their first 6 years since moving all the way out to Los Angeles. After finishing with a 12-5 record, the Los Angeles Rams would then go on to finish their 2021 season with a 12-5 record with a 4 seed in the NFC. In their first match, this was also a season where Andrew Whitworth won the Walter Payton Man of the Year. Cooper Kupp would go on to win the Offensive Player of the Year in the regular season as well, after winning the Triple Crown, finishing with more receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns than any other wide receiver in football for the year. Once the Rams made the playoffs, they ended up beating the Cardinals by 23. Not to mention, this is also the season where they got Matt Stafford to start the year as well. But with Matt Stafford and Von Miller's help, along with OBJ, they ended up beating the Cardinals 34-11 in the wild card round. In the second round, they ended up beating Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in 3 games before Tom Brady temporarily retired for about 2-3 weeks. And then they would go on to the NFC Championship, where they would go on to beat their division rivals, the San Francisco 49ers, by 3. Once they made it to the Super Bowl 56 in their home stadium in Los Angeles, they would go on to beat the Cincinnati Bengals by 3. They ended up winning it 23-20, as Von Miller actually recorded a couple of sacks in the Super Bowl himself. The only other players to record multiple sacks in multiple Super Bowl games is Justin Tuck of the New York Giants. He would also tie Charles Haley's record for the most career Super Bowl sacks, as he has 4.5 sacks, as he's played in 3 fewer Super Bowls than Charles Haley. So that would be how Von Miller would win his 2nd Super Bowl and be a very big part of winning it, and almost go on to win his 2nd Super Bowl MVP. But he would go on to be signed by the Buffalo Bills this offseason to a 6-year, $120 million deal. And at this moment, he still has yet to play for the Buffalo Bills. But the Buffalo Bills are a very good team in the AFC East, and adding Von Miller to that defense might be what puts the Buffalo Bills over the edge. I guess we'll wait until next year to see if Von Miller is the player that puts them over the edge. With that said, I first want to thank everyone for listening to all 29 minutes of this episode. I do hope all is well. I want to thank the Football Reference, College Football Reference, the ESPN, and NFL websites for giving me all the facts and figures. I wouldn't be able to do this episode without them. And if you ever get a chance to watch Von Miller, it looks as though he's going to be wearing number 40 for the Buffalo Bills. So, of course, congratulations to him and everything that he's done as he's now turning 33. He is one of the best defensive ends, if not the most consistent defensive end of the 2010s, as he's literally played alongside greats such as, J.J. Watt, not to mention even played with linebackers, played in the same position as, let's say, Bobby Wagner or Luke Kuechly. He's played with really good defenders in a very good defensive era, and he's even won 2 different Super Bowls and 2 legendary teams. I think Von Miller has a very storied NFL football career, and I can't wait to see how it eventually ends one day, but for right now, it's not. Thanks for listening to this piece. I hope all is well. Happy 33rd birthday to Von Miller. And once everything is done today, I'll come back with more tomorrow on Sunday, March 27th, 2022, once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done. So until then, thanks for listening. I hope all is well. Thanks for listening to my piece, and peace out. I'll catch you with more tomorrow.